بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والحمد لله رب العالمين وصلوات ربي وسلامه على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم وبعد. So to continue inshallah with the Ihya of Imam Hujjatul Islam Abu Hamid al-Ghazali rahimahullah ta'ala. And so just to recap what we were talking about last week quickly before we move on, and bi'idhnillah we'll finish this section today inshallah. So we're talking about the alamat of the ulama al-akhirah, signs of the ulama who are learning and teaching and working for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's deen. And just before we begin, if the sisters would like to come round and sit at the back, they can, inshallah. If brothers move forward to give space to the sisters, as some sisters were mentioning that they would prefer to be more engaged. Or just open the curtain. So, as I was saying, so we'll take a recap, inshallah, bi'idhnillah, prior to continuing from where we left off. So the sign that we discussed last week, al-Ghazali rahimahullah ta'ala, he says, وَمِنْهَا أَلَّا يَكُونَ مُسَارِعًا إِلَى الْفُتْيَا, that the alim of the akhirah, the alim who's working for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's sake and who has the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as his sole intention, he will not be hasty in giving fatwa, in giving rulings and religious edicts. And we mentioned al-Ghazali rahimahullah, he says, كان ابن عمر رضي الله تعالى عنهما يسأل عن 10 مسائل فيجيب عن واحدة ويسكت عن 9. That Ibn Umar, the famous scholar of Islam and companion of the Prophet ﷺ, he would be asked about 10 things and he would only answer 1, and he would remain silent for the other 9. Whereas today, we mentioned today, if a person were to answer only 1 and to remain silent on 9, we would say this person isn't a person of knowledge, i.e. if we had an alim that came to visit us, etc. Then he says, وَمِنْهَا أن يكون أكثر اهتمامه بعلم الباطن ومراقبة القلب ومعرفة طريق الآخرة وسلوكه وصدق الرجاء. So he says that one of the signs of the ulama of the akhirah is that you will find their focus and their emphasis is on that which relates to the internal rather than that which relates to the external, i.e. rectification of the self. Knowing the heart, the states of the heart, the sicknesses of the soul, and so on and so forth, and how to relieve oneself from these sicknesses. Why? Because it's these sicknesses which will pollute a person's vision, and as we discussed previously, will lead to a person acting in particular ways. If a person's heart is filled with envy, if a person's heart is filled with hatred, if a person's heart is filled with arrogance, and so on and so forth, it's going to impact the way that he interacts with others. As we mentioned, I believe last week or a few weeks ago, if a person has arrogance in the heart and someone were to barge into them, their response will be different than the person who does not have arrogance in the heart. And of course, it's not to say someone shouldn't defend themselves. We already discussed this. So he says that the alim of the akhirah, his main focus is on knowing how to attain the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the road to the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which relates to the inner dimensions of Islam. And this in reality, it's something that we don't pay any attention to today. For most, they would like to learn about fiqh, they would like to learn about aqidah, theology, they would like to learn about hadith, they would like to learn about the scientific aspects of tafsir and so on and so forth. But when it comes to learning about rectification of the heart, rectification of the soul, rectification of character, it's not something which is given the right that it deserves from us. And what did the Prophet ﷺ say? He said, I came to complete good character. He said his goal was to complete good character. And when you think about good character is good character with al-Khaliq and good character with al-Makhluq. And to know how to have good character with al-Khaliq, the creator, you have to know the framework of Islam. To know how to have good character with the Makhluq, the creation, you have to know the framework of Islam. And therefore that gives you an intention. I'm learning the framework of Islam so that I can apply it and be of good character to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to the creation and attain paradise. The Prophet ﷺ said that the person of good character will reach the station of the Qawwam, the Sawwam, the one who prays the nights and fasts the days, the person of good character. Why is that the case? Because good character is not easy to attain. When you have an anger management issue, to rid yourself of the anger management issue takes a long time. It's not easy, it's not overnight. When you have a problem of arrogance, pride, envy, hatred, and so on and so forth in the heart, it takes a while to get rid of those things. First, you have to understand that they're there. First, you have to know the symptoms. Then you have to isolate what is it that the problem is. Then you have to work on it. And you have to better yourself. It takes a while, and it's a bitter pill to swallow to firstly admit that you have something wrong with you. Many people don't like to admit it, especially in this time today. We live in a time where people are told that the world should accept them for who they are, and so on and so forth. But really, is that how it should be? We shouldn't change ourselves. The world should just accept us for who we are, and so on. We live in a world that today, currently, we justify following desires and we mask the lack of wanting to better ourselves. And the pursuit of betterment is a noble pursuit that was a goal in and of itself with the scholars of the past and previous civilizations. When you read classical philosophy, the pursuit of betterment of oneself is a noble pursuit. It's something that the people of the past would seek out, just for the sake of betterment of the self, to refine oneself and so on and so forth. So then he says, ومنها أن يكون حزينا منكسرا صامتا يظهر أثر الخشية على هيئته وكسوته وسيرته وحركته وسكوته ونطقه. So this is one, perhaps it's a topic of discussion, but he says, so you can tell me what do you think about this. He says that the ulama of the akhirah, the alim of the akhirah, one of his signs is that you will see his state is a state of huzn. He's hazeen. He's in a state of sadness. Munkasiran. And munkasir means to be, literally means to be broken. So you can imagine the image of a broken person, not literally, but it's not, chest out, head held up high, proud. No, it's munkasiran. It's humble. You could say to some extent, perhaps slightly depressed. Samitan, quiet. The person of samit is the one that doesn't speak very often. So if you were to meet a person today and he was in a state of sadness, perhaps looked slightly depressed, and he was always quiet, what would you think about this person? Would you say to yourself, this must be a person of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? No, what would you say? So for some, the first thing that comes to mind, this person must need help. They must be going through difficulty. So why would the alim of the akhirah, why would he be in a state of sadness and depression and not wanting to speak to others? How does that relate to knowledge, to ilm? Anyone?
Not speaking about knowledge, and not afraid of himself saying something wrong.
Okay, that's a good one. So he would be afraid to say something that's wrong and be accountable for it with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Whereas the person who is heedless of his akhirah, he's going to say whatever comes to mind.
The more knowledge you gain, the true value, the next life, and how low this life is.
Yeah, the more knowledge you acquire, the true knowledge, as you said, the more you will realize that this life is worthless, and the next life is the true pursuit. But why would that make a person sad, depressed?
So we don't want to be here now.
Yeah, so maybe because they don't want to be here. Ad-dunya sijnul mu'min.
Better of them.
Huh?
Maybe the shaitan got the better of them. That's why they sad and depressed. Those that change the life of this dunya.
Those that?
The life of this dunya.
No, so this is about the ulama, the alim. Why would the alim be sad and depressed?
Oh, I thought you were talking about today's era.
No. Why would the alim, like Imam al-Ghazali is saying, that the alim of the akhirah should be in this state? Why? Why would he be sad and depressed?
Not getting too comfortable in his life as well.
Perhaps not getting too comfortable in his life. But
Responsibility, maybe they had a responsibility on the shoulder.
let me ask you a question. If you have a very what's the word, risky surgery that's going to take place at the end of the week, and it's a surgery which could potentially lead to your death, what are you going to be like during the week prior to the surgery?
Perhaps thinking much about it after the dunya is not, they don't really attach too much to the dunya.
Yeah, but look, the question I asked, how would you be if you know, You'll be edgy, you'll be anxious. You wouldn't, if someone comes and starts joking with you, light-hearted joking, are you really gonna, are you gonna laugh? If you've got a serious operation taking place, serious surgery taking place in the next few days, are you gonna care about money? You might care, about that which you might. If I'm going to pass away during the surgery, what am I going to leave behind? But are you going to care about it from the perspective of, feeding yourself, clothing yourself, all of those things? They might be secondary cares, but in the moment, you're not going to have any concern for those things. If you come home and your favorite food isn't prepared for you, you open the fridge and you don't have your favorite food, are you going to care? Why? Because you're thinking about something far more important, which is what? It's a life or death situation, a critical surgery. So now let's go back to the state of the ulama who live for the akhirah. Why would they be sad and depressed?
Because they might think that, okay, the rule is they might say you have to say certain fatwa, or they're going to put that condition. They might not want to give that because that is really...
That's why they might be quiet, but why would they be sad and depressed?
With knowledge, I guess, comes understanding of the nature of this life and this world, and the tests that are going to come with it. And there's no saying, we don't know what the qadar of Allah is, so we don't know if we're going to make it into heaven or we're not going to make it into heaven.
Exactly. That's one of the points. So because they have acquired knowledge of the next life, real knowledge, they understand what they're going to be facing when they pass away.
Yeah, it's true. Like obviously it says in the Quran, no one knows what is kept for him, whether for punishment or reward. But also, not to obviously lose hope that obviously forgiveness and which reward Allah will also give you that. So.
Of course. But the reality is, when you have a surgery, let's say it's a surgery and there's a 70% success rate, 30% rate of potential failure, are you going to be thinking about the 70% or the 30%? The 30% chance of failure is going to be on your mind. So even if you're smiling, you're going to be anxious. You're going to be worried in the back of your mind. And that's going to come forward from time to time. So these ulama, that's how Imam al-Ghazali is describing those type of ulama. And we'll come to something else afterwards, because also what has to be taken into consideration is personality types. Personality types are different. You have, for example, the personality type which is, perhaps it's poetically sad, a poetically sad person, and then you have the bubbly, and the jokeful, the light-hearted. But can you say that one is better than the other in terms of taqwa? No. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creates us differently. But the ulama, the point here is that the ulama who have attached themselves to the akhirah, they know what's coming. They know what's coming. Like, put yourself into a situation where you felt anxious because there's something big that's going to take place in your life shortly. It could be, a trip to the doctors. Perhaps you've taken a test and you're awaiting the outcome. And perhaps it's a literal exam. Perhaps someone else in your family, you're worried about them. So everything else becomes irrelevant. Everything else becomes irrelevant. That's how the ulama see this life, irrelevant. Why? Because they're thinking about what's coming. And that sounds like a very difficult way to live in such a state. And al-Dhahabi, rahimahullah, he has many accounts of ulama that lived in such a manner, as has been mentioned previously in his Sir Alam al-Nubala. Some of the ulama, they would weep all night. They wouldn't eat, they wouldn't sleep, they wouldn't drink, they wouldn't spend time with anyone else because they were so afraid, so scared of the akhirah. And others who are just as righteous, they lived a different way. They were hopeful, they were happy, they were gleeful, and so on and so forth. So sometimes it has to do with personality type. But the reason I wanted to focus on this for a short time is because we assume today, like you said, if you saw someone like that, you would say he needs help. Because we're conditioned to see a person who doesn't speak often, or maybe looks sad, depressed. We're conditioned to think there's something wrong with this person. What about if the reality is there's something wrong with us? What about if the reality of the matter was that we have the problem, not the person who's sad and depressed? And could that be the case? If you knew that you were going to pass away at the end of the week, how would you live your life? Would you be scrolling on YouTube? Would you be joking around with your friends? Would you be, thinking about what am I going to eat tonight? And I'm not saying those things are bad things. I'm not. But to understand our own states, we have to be able to question our own states. We have to read the text and try to read from the text and use the text to guide us, i.e., how does this relate to me? It's not to say that living, because it would be, you have to have fear and you have to have hope. But when you look at the Prophet ﷺ, he would cry profusely. When he would laugh so that his teeth were seen, but he wouldn't laugh loudly. He was a person who was serious in his nature, and so on and so forth. So to an extent, he fits the description that al-Ghazali rahimahullah is describing. We all know the hadith where the Prophet ﷺ was crying, saying, "Ummati, ummati, my ummah, my ummah." His heart was engulfed in worry for his people. So he says, أن يكون حزينا منكسرا صامتا. Then he says, يظهر أثر الخشية على هيئته وكسوته وسيرته وحركته وسكوته ونطقه. That the khashya of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so the consciousness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this person can be seen in his hay'ah, his demeanor. When you see this person, you think to yourself, this is a person of God, a person of Allah. You can see it in his demeanor. You can see it in his clothing, in his apparel, his attire. You can see it in the way that he interacts with people, the way that he walks, the way that he talks, his movement, and so on and so forth. You can see it in his silence and in his speech. So you can see that the reason for his existence, you could say, is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He is conscious of Allah in everything about him. And now remember, we have to remind ourselves, al-Ghazali rahimahullah is speaking about the ulama. He's not talking about, aspiring students of knowledge or those who would like to be from the ubbad or the salihin. This is the level of the ulama, those who have dedicated their entire lives to understanding the framework of Islam. So it would be wrong for us to listen to this and try to be like this. If we were to attempt to live like this, we would end up harming ourselves. Moderation is key. The reason I even considered not mentioning this part, because we're so far away from this that it could cause harm if we were to try to emulate this. But the reason that I thought no, it's a good idea to mention it is because it can allow us time to question the way that we live. To question the way that we see things, the way that what's a common phrase today? I just want to be happy. I deserve to be happy. I want some peace. We expect, or we feel that we're entitled to happiness, to peace, to ease, to comfort, all of these things. But the ulama, they didn't expect these things. The ulama of the past. Why? Because they understood the reality of this life, which is what? This life is what? It's a test. And as we mentioned in the room, the examination room, when you're in the examination room, you're not going to look at the chair and say, I can't sit on this plastic chair. I need a cushioned chair. You're not going to. You're not going to think about the type of table that you're writing on. You're not going to think about the pen. You're not going to think about the quality of the paper. You're not going to look at the clock and question the brand of the clock. Why? Because you're in an examination room. You know that right now I'm supposed to be taking my exam. My only reason to be here is passing my exam. You don't care about anything else in that moment of time. The ulama saw this dunya like that.
Like obviously, when you have Allah, you have everything that you desire. Everything that you desire will make you happy. Like, for example, like if you establish five daily prayers, right? And you, like as a believer, you will automatically be content with whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends your way.
Of course.
Whether you want peace or happiness, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's contentment. So it's contentment. So true happiness comes through contentment. If you can find contentment in that which you have been given by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then you'll find happiness. But if your pursuit of happiness leads you to want more than what you already have, you will never be happy. Why? Because as the Prophet ﷺ said, the mouth of the son of Adam will never be filled except with the earth when he's placed into his grave. Whenever we acquire something new, there's always something newer that we want. There's always something better that we want. That's the nature of man. So to realize that and to try to find contentment in that which we have, that's what will give us happiness. It doesn't mean that we don't try to change our circumstance. But the purpose for acquirement of new things should be the function. What function does this new thing give me? Rather than to seek pleasure in it. And I'm sure every single one of us here have experienced. You buy something new, you're attached to it for a little while, and then what happens? You become bored of it. You want something new to fill its place. And that continues until death. The only time that stops is when a person stops himself from that pursuit and comes to realize, I'm not going to find happiness in anything that's already out there. I'm going to find happiness in contentment of that which I have. It doesn't mean that we seek to live lives as impoverished people. No, but we seek wealth for the function. As the ulama said, that the wealth should be in the hand, not in the heart. If I'm seeking wealth because I want pleasure through that wealth, that means it's attached to the heart. If I'm seeking wealth because I want to use that wealth, it's in the hand. And if we're seeking things for function, then that's healthy. If we're seeking things for pleasure and for fulfillment, that's problematic. And fulfillment will never, you cannot attain fulfillment in this life. Let me give you an example. If you have a hungry person, what does a hungry person feel?
Hungry.
Yeah, we've established that. So what do they feel? What does the hungry person feel?
Patience.
Okay, so agitated, irritability, Angry. Yeah. Subhanallah. But what feelings, like what body sensations will they have? It could lead to pain, right? Where? In the gut. Pain in the gut region. If this person didn't know what that pain was, this person didn't know what the body was asking for, what do you think this person would do? Imagine this person doesn't know that you have to put things into your mouth and swallow them in order to satisfy the pangs of hunger. What do you think this person would do?
End up in the hospital.
Prior to ending up in the hospital, huh?
Go ask the doctor what's the problem.
He could go and ask the doctor what the problem is. Yeah, he could try to feel that pain through other means. Search after. He would start looking. How do I get rid of this pain? Right. Likewise, the heart. When the heart is hungry for something, when the inner self is hungry for something, we try to fill it. What do we try to fill it with? What do we try to fill it with? Material things. Yeah, entertainment, acquirement of new things. We try to fill our inner selves, our hearts, with excitement, with pleasure, and so on and so forth. Because we don't know what we actually need. What we actually need is very simple. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's it. And that feeling will not be satiated until we attach ourselves to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's why you see in society today, people are chasing after the dunya, they acquire the dunya, they realize the dunya is not satisfying. and then they fall into depression. They fall into addictions of various kinds. Many people commit suicide and so on and so forth. Why? Because there's something that cannot be filled except with that, like that which is otherworldly can only be filled with that which is otherworldly. And the heart, as Imam al-Ghazali rahimahullah, he says, there's a part of the heart which is otherworldly. And we have indication of that when you think about yourself. It's you cannot fill it with material. You can't fill it with, food and drink is not going to satisfy the heart or the soul. Just as eating earth is not going to satisfy the stomach. Everything has to be filled with that which it requires. The soul requires Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The heart requires Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The heart requires attachment to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And from that is purpose, to know our purpose. Just as the orphan child searches for his parents, the soul searches for its purpose. And its purpose is to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Every other purpose is not going to satisfy the soul.
Why did you say like using money for pleasure is unhealthy? If you have the intention that this is going to bring temporary pleasure, is that unhealthy?
No, because from the functions of wealth, so why did I say it's unhealthy to use your money for pleasure? If that's your sole reason for seeking money. Like you're saying, I want to get rich. Why? So I can drive nice cars, I can wear nice clothes, I can have relationships, I can do this. And like the reason to get wealthy is because you want to live a comfortable and luxurious lifestyle. That's unhealthy. But if you're going to use your money for pleasure, for the function of giving your soul a rest, that's different. There's a function there. Because the soul needs rest. Like if you were to read for 10 hours straight, you're going to burn out. You have to have rest. So that's a function. But today, why do people seek out wealth? They don't seek out wealth except but to what? To enjoy this life, to enjoy the dunya, to seek the pleasure of the dunya, etc. And then he says, وعلماء الآخرة يعرفون بسيماهم في السكينة والتواضع. And so basically he says the ulama of the akhirah, they'll be known from their signs. Why? Because this understanding of this life and so on and so forth leads to them being humble and being calm and collected in their nature. And he says وأما التهافت في الكلام. So listen to this, because now let's reflect on this and our time. He says, وَأَمَّا التَّهَافُتُ فِي الْكَلَامِ وَالتَّشَدُّقُ وَالْإِسْتِغْرَاقُ فِي الضَّحِكِ وَالْحِدَّةُ في الحركة والنطق فكل ذلك من آثار البطر والأمن والغفلة عن عظيم عقاب الله تعالى وهو دأب أبناء الدنيا الغافلين عن الله دون العلماء به. He says, as for confrontational style of interaction, talking, والتشدق, so harshness in speech. Before I go into the other two, I'll focus on this. He says this isn't from the signs of the ulama of the akhirah. This is from the signs of people who are heedless. Why would that be the case? Why would being confrontational be a sign of heedlessness? Being harsh in speech being a sign of heedlessness? Because it's contrary to humility. It's contrary to someone who's conscious of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, conscious of his interactions with others. And then he says, وَالْإِسْتِغْرَاقُ فِي الضَّحِكِ, and being engrossed in constant laughter and lightheartedness. Likewise, وَالْحِدَةُ فِي الْحَرَكَةِ وَالنُّطْقِ, sharpness in movement and speech. He says all of these are signs of arrogance, and they are signs of he says أبناء الدنيا, the sons of the dunya, the sons of this life, i.e. those who are chasing after this life. And he says والأمن والغفلة عن عظيم عقاب الله تعالى is likewise, so the al-ghafla, heedlessness, like living this life as is commonly said today, you only live once. Living this life as if there's no consequence to this life, that's heedlessness. To be heedless, i.e. to be heedless of the akhirah. When we step outside, is that not how we're living as a society today? There's no consequence anymore. We've removed ourselves from accountability. Why? Because God has been taken away from society. He says, وَالْأَمَنِ, to feel a sense of security. If a person feels a sense of security, This is a state of heedlessness. Why is that the case? Because they feel secure from what? From the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so the person who feels secure from the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in a state of heedlessness. And so we can ask ourselves, am I heedless? Do I feel safe from the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? If I do, it's a sign that I'm in a state of heedlessness. Because the reality is, do I know whether or not I'm going to be punished by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? I don't. So I should be worried about the punishment of Allah. I shouldn't feel secure. I don't know what the end of my life is going to be like. So, and that should make me appreciate Islam. That should make me, as the Prophet ﷺ used to say, Ya muqallib al-qulub, thabbit qalbi ala dinik. Oh, you who keeps the hearts firm, keep my heart firm upon your deen. If I didn't feel secure, I would be constantly making this dua. I would be asking Allah, oh Allah, make me from those who pray. Oh Allah, bless me with Iman. Oh Allah, grant me guidance. Why? Because I don't feel secure. I don't trust myself. I don't trust this dunya. Then he says, ومنها أن يكون أكثر بحثي أو أن يكون أكثر بحثه عن علم الأعمال وعما يفسدها ويشوش القلوب ويهيج الوسواس فإن أصل الدين التوقي من الشر. He says, from the signs of the ulama of the akhirah is that most of his research, most of the time that he spends in research is in knowledge which relates to the practical implementation of Islam. And that which would lead to the invalidity of the practical Islam, i.e. the salah, zakah, hajj, sawm, things like that. Why? Because he doesn't want to invalidate his worship. He wants to keep his worship intact. He wants to make sure that his worship is intact. He says, likewise, he will be spending a lot of research time on that which disrupts the hearts. So, that which disrupts the hearts from the whispers of shaitan, from the whispers of the inner self. And that's another thing that we don't recognize in society today, that we have within us good nature and bad nature. And the good nature can overcome the bad nature can overcome the good nature. And it's about that which we side with. If I constantly follow the bad thoughts, the bad will overcome the good. If I constantly follow the good thoughts, the good will overcome the bad. And every single choice that I make is a step towards either one of those directions. He says, وَيُهِيجُ الْوَسْوَاسِ, that which arouses the whispers of shaitan, i.e. waswas being today what we would perhaps call intrusive thoughts. He says, فَإِنَّ أَصْلَ الدِّينِ التَّوَقِّي مِنَ الشَّرِّ. He says that the foundation of our deen is to avoid basically the potholes that will lead us to wickedness and evil. He says, وَلَقَدْ كَانَ الْحَسَنُ الْبَصْرِ. So now he's going to give a very good example. Hasan al-Basri, very famous. Everyone's heard of Hasan al-Basri, or they've at least heard his name if they've attended a masjid for a short period of time, because his statements are always being used. He says, وَلَقَدْ كَانَ الْحَسَنُ الْبَصْرِ رَحِمَهُ اللَّهُ تَعَالَى أَشْبَهَ النَّاسِ كَلَامًا بِكَلَامِ الْأَنْبِيَاءِ. He said that al-Hasan al-Basri, it was agreed that he was the most closest to the Prophet ﷺ in speech from those that came after him. وَأَقْرَبُهُمْ هَدْيًا مِنَ الصَّحَابَةِ رَضِيَ اللَّهُ عَنْهُمْ. Likewise, he was the closest to the Sahaba in his demeanor, guidance, his personality. اتفقت الكلمة في حقه على ذلك, and this was agreed upon by those around him, those of his time. وكان أكثر كلامه في خواطر القلوب. And this is where the evidence is coming. He says most of that which Al-Hasan al-Basri would speak about was what? When you've heard Al-Hasan al-Basri, what does it relate to? Fiqh? Zuhud, tazkiyah, etc. So he's saying most of the statements of Al-Hasan al-Basri were in relation to the heart, the soul, purification of the self. وفساد الأعمال, that which would destroy a person's good deeds. ووساوس النفوس, and the whispers of the self. والصفات الخفية الغامضة من شهوات النفس, and the hidden and incomprehensible to most attributes of the desires, basically. So the indications of desire. That many of us, and this is something we spoke about when we go through fiqh, that one of the important aspects of following a madhab is to protect yourself from your own desire. You may not realize when you're inclining towards your desire because you mask it from yourself in the name of following the Quran and the Sunnah and so on and so forth. He says, وَقَدْ قِيلَ لَهُ يَا أَبَا سَعِيدٍ إِنَّكَ تَتَكَلَّمُ بِكَلَامٍ لَا يُسْمَعُ مِنْ غَيْرِكَ فَمِنْ أَيْنَ أَخَذْتَ. It was said to him, O Abu Sa'id, so his nickname, you speak about things that no one else speaks about. Where did you get it from? And he said, قال من حذيفة بن اليمان, that he took it from the Sahabi al-Hudhayfa or Hudhayfa ibn al-Yaman. And it was said to Hudhayfa, نراك تتكلم بكلام لا يسمع من غيرك من الصحابة فمن أين أخذت. It was said to him, you speak about things that none of the other companions speak about. Or if they do, not as much as you. Where did you get this from? فقال كان الناس يسألون رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم عن الخير وكنت أسأله عن الشر مخافة أن أقع فيه. He said that everyone was asking the Prophet ﷺ about good things, about the good. And I was asking him about the wicked. Why? So that I could avoid falling into it. So he's saying that a lot of that which is evil and wicked and corrupt comes from what? The heart. That which relates to the soul and so on and so forth. What did the Prophet ﷺ say? The one who has an ounce of arrogance in his heart will not enter paradise. And where does that relate to? Can you measure the arrogance that you have? Is it tangible? Is it something that you can see? No. It's something that you have to learn about yourself. How? Through testing yourself, asking yourself, probing yourself, through reflecting upon your actions. Where are your thoughts coming from? Why do I think this way about this person? Why do I speak in such a manner? Why am I acting like this? To understand. And that's what we're going to go through with the book, inshallah, to understand the indications of these issues. Then he says, وَمِنْهَا أَن يَكُونَ اعْتِمَادُهُ فِي عُلُومِهِ عَلَى بَصِيرَتِهِ وَإِدْرَاكِهِ بِصَفَاءِ قَلْبِهِ لَا عَلَى تَقْلِيدِ مَا يَسْمَعُهُ مِنْ غَيْرِهِ. So this is, now when we speak about this issue, we have to remember to contextualize it. He's speaking about signs of the ulama, not lay people. He says that he relies upon his understanding of the sciences of Islam. The alim for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala relies upon his understanding and his foundation of the Islamic sciences and his comprehension of these sciences and that which he uses these sciences to derive from the Quran and Sunnah with his clean, pure heart. And he doesn't rely upon basically blind following others. So is he saying that a person who wants to gain closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala should not blind follow, i.e. should not follow a madhab? No, he's not saying that. He's talking about the alim. Who's the alim? He's the one who has mastered all of the sciences of Islam and has reached a level wherein he's capable of understanding the Quran and Sunnah using those mastered sciences, i.e. the tools that he's acquired of ijtihad. He's able to reason, to deduce, and so on and so forth. As for the average person has no choice but to follow a madhab. Why? He says, وَإِنَّمَا الْمُقَلَّدُ صَاحِبُ الشَّرْعِ صلى الله عليه وسلم فيما أمر به وقاله. He says that the one who has right to be followed is the Prophet ﷺ in that which he commanded and that which he said. So should we go to the Rasul ﷺ to follow his words? What did he say? وَإِنَّمَا يُقَلَّدُ وَالصَّحَابَةُ رَضِيَ اللَّهُ تَعَالَى عَنْهُمْ مِنْ حَيْث إِنَّ فِعْلَهُمْ يَدُلُّ عَلَى سَمَاعِهِمْ مِنْ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ عَلَيْهِ السَّلَامِ. He says that the companions are to be followed. Why? Because the companions' actions indicate that they heard these things from who? The Prophet ﷺ. So who do we follow? When we're following a madhab, who are we following? We're following the companions. We're following a formulation of the statements of the Prophet ﷺ, the actions of the Prophet ﷺ, according to the understanding of the companions. As was mentioned, for those of you that attend the fiqh class, the Hanafi school, for example, going back to the likes of Ibn Mas'ud and Ali ibn Abi Talib, the Maliki madhab, for example, going back to the Sahaba and the Tabi'een that lived in the Hijaz region, and Imam al-Shafi'i, he married between the two, and he also took from the knowledge that was settled in Egypt with many of the Sahaba. If you remember historically, they went to Egypt to open Egypt. And so many of the Sahaba, such as Amr ibn al-As and others, they settled in Egypt. They were living in Egypt. So knowledge was taken from the Sahaba. So the Shafi'i madhab, likewise, it's a marriage between the knowledge of the Sahaba in Hijaz, the knowledge of the Sahaba in Iraq, and the knowledge of the Sahaba in Egypt, as taken from them by the Tabi'een and then formulated by these Imams. So when we follow a madhab, this is what we're doing. But the alim should what? Should aspire to reach that level where he is able to deduce the rulings from the Quran and the Sunnah himself, using what? Using the tools that are necessary to do so. And that's his pursuit of knowledge. Studying usul, studying lugha, studying tafsir, studying hadith, and so on and so forth. And it takes a lifetime. It's not something where someone goes away, goes to an Islamic institution, comes back, and suddenly he has the ability to derive from the Quran and from the Sunnah. No. If someone's acting in such a manner where they're saying, this is the correct opinion because Allah says this and the Prophet ﷺ says that, most of the time, either they're fooling themselves or they're trying to fool other people. That's the reality of the matter. Because Islamic knowledge is not acquired in 4 or 5 years. If a person has only just understood the Arabic language, they have no right to suggest what the correct opinion in a matter is. And if they're following a contemporary scholar and they're teaching people that the opinions they're taking from a contemporary scholar, then they should clarify that. And they shouldn't act like they are following the Quran and the Sunnah and no one else is. They shouldn't act like they're taking this knowledge from the Quran and the Sunnah themselves, because that's fooling. That's being an imposter, and that's misleading people. And most of the time, if you see a young person, as I've mentioned before, if you see a young person who doesn't have a white hair in his beard and he's claiming to be able to tell you the correct opinion from the Quran and the Sunnah himself, the person's a liar. To be frank, that's the reality most of the time, because Islamic knowledge is not something which is acquired overnight. It's not something which is acquired in 5 years or 10 years or 15 years or 20 years. It takes a long time. And if you think about the ulama who we now see as being from the ulama, the esteemed ulama, from whichever school they hail from, if you think about those individuals, most of them are old in age. They're not young in age. You don't have a young 30-year-old who's being held in high esteem as an alim today. Most of them are in between 60 and 80 years old. You might have a younger sheikh who's highly followed and listened to, but that's not necessarily an alim. It may be a sheikh, a student of knowledge, maybe on their way to becoming an alim, but I'm talking about the alim who Imam al-Ghazali is describing. And one of the problems of our time is that we don't recognize who the ulama are. And so it's easy for someone to come wearing a bisht and a shamagh, and we say this person is an alim, this person is a sheikh. It's very easy for someone to climb up onto the minbar and give a moving khutbah speech, and we say this person is an alim. And that's problematic. Why? Because it can lead to problems within our community, which is what we're seeing. So we have to be very careful. Imam al-Ghazali, rahimahullah, he's describing ulama to the letter of the meaning. The alim has to master the Arabic language and the various branches of Arabic language. From the very basic being the grammar, the rhetoric, the history. Likewise, he has to master the sciences which relate to the Quran. So the modes of recitation, the philosophy of interpretation. He has to master the sciences which relate to hadith. Most importantly, understanding what hadith is, knowing all of the ahadith, where to find them, etc. And the real alim, he's going to know how to break down the chains, how to authenticate, and so on and so forth. And that alone takes a lifetime to learn. He's going to have to know all of the madhahib of Islam in fiqh, in jurisprudence, not just one madhab, but all of them. And that's just a few of the sciences that this person will have to know. To master one madhab, for example, the Hanafi madhab, if you were to dedicate your time to learning the Hanafi madhab, it would most likely take around 10 years. Just the Hanafi madhab alone. So it's not something where a person can learn a few things and they should open a YouTube channel and start giving fatwa. That's problematic, extremely problematic. And that's exactly what Imam al-Ghazali is speaking about. You would find the alim is samit. He doesn't want to speak. Then he says, ثم إذا قلد صاحب الشرع في تلقي أقواله وأفعاله فينبغي أن يكون حريصا على فهم أسراره وفعله عليه الصلاة والسلام لا بد وأن يكون لسر فيه فينبغي أن يكون شديد البحث عن أسرار الأعمال والأقوال فإنه إن اكتفى بحفظ ما يقال كان وعاء للعلم ولا يكون عالما. And then he says something very important. He says that the alim basically he is deep in his research. He doesn't suffice with a literal interpretation of the Quran and the Sunnah. He doesn't simply take a literal interpretation of the Prophet ﷺ statements. He goes far deeper than that. And he says if he takes a literal approach, then he simply becomes a vessel for knowledge, but not actually a person of knowledge. And there's a big difference between the two. And it's one of the problems that we have. A person assumes someone who has memorized. Imagine today someone comes to the masjid and he's memorized Sahih Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, the Sunan of Abi Dawood and Nasa'i, At-Tirmidhi, and so on and so forth. We would say, wow, this person is what? What would you call this person?
Alim.
An alim. But is he necessarily an alim? Imam al-Ghazali is saying someone who has memorized and can tell you the literal meaning of a hadith is not an alim. He's a vessel of knowledge. He's someone who's carrying knowledge, but not someone who necessarily understands that which he's carrying. And there's a clear distinction between the two. A hard drive contains all of the books of hadith, all of the books of fiqh, all of the books of aqidah, all of the books of philosophy from multiple civilizations. Are we going to call the hard drive an alim? No. Why? Because the alim is the one who understands and implements, not simply the one who carries. Then he says, وَمِنْهَا أَن يَكُونَ شَدِيدُ التَّوَقِّي مِنْ مُحْدَثَاتِ الْأُمُورِ فلا يغرنه إطباق الخلق على ما أحدث بعد الصحابة رضي الله عنهم وليكن حريصا على التفتيش عن أحوالهم وسيرتهم وأعمالهم. He says that the alim of the akhirah, you won't find him indulging in modern affairs, new affairs. You know, he's not easily amused and what's the word? Incited with that which is newly invented. You'll find him attaching himself to the way of the Sahaba. He is you'll see him haris. So he's constantly searching after understanding the way of the Sahaba, following the way of the Sahaba. You know, he's totally engrossed in following the way of the earlier generations of Islam. Does that mean though that he's going to dress like them? No. And that's something which again is a misunderstanding. Meaning their understanding of this life, their approach to this life. But when you look at the way the Sahaba were, the Sahaba adapted from place to place, and so on and so forth. And we don't need to go too much into that anyway, because it's kind of fiqh. But the point is, the alim of the akhirah, he suffices himself with that which was left behind by the Prophet ﷺ, as given to him by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and interpreted by the Sahaba, and enacted by the Sahaba. And for us, that's the formulation of the 4 schools of fiqh and the 3 schools of aqidah. And for us, that's sufficient. Then he says وَعْلَمْ تَحْقِيقًا أَنَّ أَعْلَمْ أَهْلَ الزَّمَانِ أو أن أعلم أهل الزمان وأقربهم إلى الحق أشبههم بالصحابة. He says, know that the most knowledgeable people of a particular time and those who are closest to the truth in that particular time is those who are closest in likeliness to the Sahaba. And let me finish this before I say something. وَأَعْرَفُهُمْ بِطَرِيقِ السَّلَفِ. And those who are most knowledgeable of the methodology of the Salaf. فمنهم أخذ الدين ولذلك قال علي رضي الله تعالى عنه خيرنا أتبعنا لهذا الدين. He says the ones who are closest to the Sahaba and closest to the methodology of the Salaf, they're the ones that are closest to the Haqq in any particular time period. That's and from those people, the first generation, the Salaf means the earlier generations of Islam, the Sahaba and the Tabi'een, Atba'u Tabi'een, etc. From them is our deen. From them we take our deen. He says, for this reason, what did Ali radiallahu anhu say? He said, خَيْرُنَا أَتْبَعُنَا لِهَذَا الدِّينِ. The best of us are the best of us, the closest of us in application of this deen. So now, I want to, let's think about something. Imam al-Ghazali, rahimahullah ta'ala, when you hear his name, people usually say what? Sufi. What else? Deviant, maybe, misguided, doesn't follow the Salaf. You wouldn't think Salaf and Imam al-Ghazali. If you were to ask someone who follows the Salafi Aqidah, the Athari Aqidah, what do you say about the Ash'ari school of theology? They'll say to you, deviated from the way of the Salaf. Likewise about the Maturidiyah. And if you ask an Ash'ari the same thing about the Athariya or the modern day Salafiyya, they'll say something similar. But the reality is, each group are following the Salaf. The difference is the interpretation of the methodology of the Salaf. And it's a grave mistake for a person to say that the likes of Imam al-Ghazali and those who do not follow a particular methodology are not trying to follow the Salaf or are not following the Salaf. No, they weren't following the Salaf according to your understanding of what the Salaf were following, according to your teacher's understanding of what the Salaf were following. But the reality of the matter is, the likes of Imam al-Ghazali were following the Salaf. If we were to go into theology, Aqidah for example, you will commonly hear someone say, oh, these people, they don't follow the Quran and the Sunnah. So what are they following then? As if to say they're following that which was revealed to Isa and Musa alayhim as-salam. The Bible and the Torah. They're not following the Quran and the Sunnah. They are following the Quran and the Sunnah. The difference is interpretation of the Quran and the Sunnah. And within the 4 schools of fiqh and the 3 schools of aqidah, the difference of interpretation is a valid difference of interpretation. If it wasn't valid, you wouldn't have mountains such as Ghazali and Nawawi, Ibn Hajar, al-Razi and so on and so forth, Suyuti on one side, and the likes of Ibn al-Qayyim, Ibn Taymiyyah, Ibn Rajab, Ibn Qudama, and others on the other side. You wouldn't have this as being the case. So Imam al-Ghazali, rahimahullah ta'ala, he's saying that the ulama of the akhirah, they are closest in way to the Salaf. But what he's saying is the Salaf, they were more concerned with the state of the heart and the soul, and they were more concerned with the akhirah than they were with external things. To the extent that he even considers fiqh to be something which relates to the dunya, and it becomes something related to the akhirah when it's implemented. Yeah, and of course that's another discussion, and we'll end with that inshallah. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad